Hi, I'm Caitlin from Launch the Damn Thing. I am a solo web designer and I design personality-packed websites for people that run businesses with 3 people or less. I also educate people about using Squarespace specifically and all of the pieces that it takes to run your own business when you don't have a team. In June or July 2022, Squarespace introduced, for the first time in probably 10 years, an update to their main layout engine, which basically just means how you put stuff on the page when you're designing Squarespace websites. The whole experience has changed. They still, at the time of recording, allow us to use the classic version, which is the old version, and people are wondering, what am I doing? Do I like Fluid Engine? Do I think it's good for them to switch over? All of the things, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Fluid Engine update. It's been a few months. Where am I with it? Do I like it better or worse? Am I switching over to it? Am I using it for new clients? All the things. Let's dive in. First things first, I do actually like Fluid Engine. There are pros and cons to literally anything that you ever use in your entire life, and Fluid Engine is no different. There are things about it that I don't like, but overall, my experience with it is mostly positive. Am I using Fluid Engine? I actually do have a few sections on my website which are, so this top section is using Fluid Engine on my own website. That is the favorite tools and resources library. I wanted it to have this kind of like fun off the corner kind of thing going on. So I'm using Fluid Engine for that, but that's really one of the only main pages on my website that's using Fluid Engine actively. I have other pages in progress that are being built that are not public areas yet that will be using Fluid Engine, but for the most part, I'm still using Classic Editor simply for the fact that my website has been around for a couple years now, and I don't want to have to granularly go in and change everything over. I'm also not ready to do that because it's really too soon for me to see how that affects older layouts for my content. It's one thing to design a new website with that in mind. It's another thing to retroactively apply it to something that wasn't designed with these limitations of features in mind. So that's for my own website. For my client websites, the first one that I did after Squarespace released Fluid Engine, I did not use Fluid Engine on that client's website. I used almost entirely Classic Editor only, which is what they're calling their old or original layout builder. Since that client project, I almost entirely used Fluid Engine. I know that's kind of a big jump, but by then I was starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with it, and I was coming across fewer glitches, which is always a good thing. And for the last one, I am entirely using Fluid Engine for everything except for the footer, oddly. Because that column builder is really just a little better for responsiveness in Classic Editor than it is in Fluid Engine. So with that said, that's what I'm doing on my own website, on my clients' websites. Here are the things that I still find that are issues.
A minor annoyance is that content snaps to the cells in the grid.
So you can't do like halvesies. You can see where it snaps. You can't do like halfway across that cell and halfway across that cell because it just snaps to the nearest one. So that's a limitation. A lot of people are like, but I just want to be like a little bit to the left or whatever. Can't do that. You got to put stuff where it snaps. In the Circle forum, we have been beating Squarespace to death with the fact that we still have no tablet breakpoint. And what I mean by breakpoint is in the code, we can specify that the browser shows the website one way for this breakpoint for desktop, one way for this breakpoint for tablet, and one way for the breakpoint on mobile. Which basically means the browser has parameters where it can rearrange things or dictate how elements respond to each other on different widths of the screen. Squarespace has still not given us that middle ground tablet option, and we as professionals are frustrated. Their response seems to be that the vast majority of people are either accessing websites from desktop or mobile and not from tablet. That's what the numbers show. So it's not high on Squarespace's priority list to give us that middle breakpoint. My feeling on the matter, and seemingly the feeling of many, many other professionals, is that I don't care how low the statistic is for people to be using. The fact that there are people using it is all I need. I need to make sure that the website doesn't look unusable on that middle breakpoint. The reason why this is a big deal is because with Fluid Engine, Squarespace has given us the ability to make position changes to elements on the page based on the screen size. And we can only do that for 2 screen sizes, for desktop and for mobile, but not for tablet. So when you check the website for responsive issues and you see something weird happening on tablet, you can't do anything about it. There's nothing that you can do to change layout issues on tablet because there's no breakpoint specific to that in Fluid Engine that will allow you to make that change only for that screen size or for the screen sizes that fall into that middle. So that's where I am with that, and I'm not alone. We're still going to beat down Squarespace's door over that. In the interim, though, because that percentage is so incredibly small, it's actually not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. There are way more important things to worry about. So take that with a grain of salt. Yes, you need to be aware of it. You need to be able to check it as best you possibly can and try to prevent issues from happening, and just keep that in mind as you build on desktop, because whatever you do on desktop will also affect tablet. I'll show you what that means specifically. That's my biggest issue. My second biggest issue with Fluid Engine, which has not actually been a problem yet, is text wrap. We cannot do text that wraps around an image without doing it manually. That may not make sense, so I'm going to show you exactly what I mean right here. Let's just create a new section. So this is Classic Editor. I'm going to put in some filler text, grab a few paragraphs. Now, if I want to add an image, I'm going to pull one from the library, and I'm going to drag it onto one of the 4 corners of this text box so that the text will wrap around the image. That's all I needed to do. I have a single text block here, I have an image block here, and all I need to do is drag it to one of the 4 corners of the text box so that the image will wrap around the text. And I can kind of pick where I want it to do that. This is not something you can do on Fluid Engine. What I mean by that is watch what happens when I convert this Classic Editor section to a Fluid Engine section. If I click Upgrade, it changes. The text box is sitting in the exact same place as it was before, but it will not wrap around the image. If I wanted to create that same effect, I need to move the text next to the image and forcibly break it. Grab the rest of that, cut. Make a copy of that text block and move it underneath that. Drag it over here, paste in that copied text, and forcibly wrap it myself. So if I save the change, we have the Classic Engine version, and then we have the Fluid Engine version of that. If I go full screen and show you how this reacts, on Classic Editor, when you resize the screen, the image retains the percentage of space that it took up on the page because it's based on those columns, the 12 columns across the page, and it's approximately taking up about half the space of this text block. And it's responsive because it's just going to resize the image to fit approximately that amount of space as the screen gets smaller until it's too small to do that, and then it just stacks on top of the text block and everything that was inside of it. On Fluid Engine, it reacts completely differently. This image is 13 cells or rows high, and so is this text block. What happens is if I condense that, these two elements, because they're locked together at the same height, Squarespace is increasing the size of each cell so that they can stay that way. And this is how it's responsive in Fluid Engine. So as we resize the screen until a certain point, it keeps it at that height so that they stay together because it knows they're supposed to. But what it's doing at the same time is cropping the image completely incorrectly as far as the design goes. If this was a picture of two people, then half of their faces would be cut off because the focal point is in the middle. And if you put the focal point on one of their faces, because you can't have more than one focal point, one of them would not be cropped, but the other one would be. So this is not an ideal solution, even though it's keeping the page layout the way that we wanted. We don't actually want the image to crop that way. We want it to stay in the same ratio like it's doing up here, right? So this is a problem with text wrapping and a problem with responsiveness when it crops down. It's doing so in a funky way that we're not expecting. But worse than that, when we go down one, that block is still taking up the same amount of rows, but it's repositioned things to fit on the page. If you forget to check this, there's going to be a weird space here. So if we go back in on desktop, it is title. We can let that go all the way across the page. I don't want that text to wrap too early. This one and that one take up the same amount of vertical space on the page. And then if we switch to mobile, we have this text being aligned to the bottom and this image filling the space. If we turn on the grid and move this in just a hair, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now instead of taking 13 cells of space on the vertical height of the screen, it's now only taking up 7. This looks fine though, right? This looks fine. But just a minute ago, when we looked at it on the tablet size, watch what happens between these two elements and this text block element down here. And suddenly there's this. As we get smaller, that changes. But this is the kind of thing that drives me absolutely insane with Fluid Engine, and there's nothing I can do about it because we don't have that middle breakpoint. I have no control over item positioning on anything in between desktop and mobile. And when you look at either of these, even if I align to the top, they look fine in the editor, which is the only place that you can control what those things look like. If I give that a color background, just so you can see where this text block actually is, and let's resize it again, the image will stack on the top of the text. And then there's this weird spatial gap underneath that before the next one. And I don't know about you, but if I'm perusing this website and I see title, image, text, and then there's nothing for a second, I'm going to think that's the end of the page. I'm not going to scroll any further. So that's a usability error for me because there is more data after that, but it just may not be obvious after you've scrolled for that much and not seen anything. So that's a problem. You can resize your editor window until you see that happen. You can click on it, drag it up to resize the text block, because what's actually happening is for some reason Fluid Engine thinks that that text block needs to take up a certain number of cells, even though the screen size doesn't need all of that extra space. So if you resize the text block and you drag this one up, and see we're still in desktop, we're not in mobile, even though this is a narrower screen. This is why I say this is confusing for Squarespace, the platform. It doesn't know what the heck we're doing. It's showing us that this is in desktop mode, but it's giving us the grid for mobile. So if we resize the text block to get rid of that extra space, and then we grab this text block and scoot it up and resize it because it had extra space, and then we get rid of all this extra space underneath it and save the change, And let's open that back up, do a full screen preview, and let's see what happens. Did that fix the issue? Yes. So there is a way around it. It's just a really pain in the ass thing to have to keep up with when you're creating, 3+ sections for every single page of your website. The other piece to Fluid Engine that is going to matter to a lot of people is the fact that they're not used to having to check the mobile layout of things. So if you create a new section, I always start with blanks on all my website builds. So if I do text, title goes here, and I'm going to make that heading 2. If you don't want the text to wrap funky, you do have to make sure that text block goes all the way across the page. If you don't, the text is always going to be locked to a certain number of cells, and when the screen size gets smaller, it keeps the text within that small text block, which may or may not be a bad thing, but if you don't want it to wrap too early, then I just go ahead and drag it all the way across the page so that it has the full width of the section and won't wrap as early. Okay, so text block, let's give it an image. Select from library, we'll pick people this time, and then maybe I make a copy of that, move it over here, make that a heading 4, put in some filler text, and then I'm going to add a button underneath that. Going to make sure the image fills the entire space. Okay, so if this is the layout that I'm looking for, and I accidentally delete that block, and then I have to put it back in, no big deal, right? I was able to do that just fine, super easy. But watch what I see on mobile. I have image, then the subtitle and the paragraph text, the button, and then the title. Why? Because I actually added that or re-added that last. By default, everything that shows up on mobile will be placed in the order that you added it to this section, not based on its actual location within the section. So on desktop, the title is up at the top and goes all the way across the page. On mobile, it's at the bottom because that was the last element that I added to this section. The positive is that we can actually change this, and you can do it really easily without actually having to click and drag it. If you just select the thing, you can change the placement order by sending it back up to the top, and then it's at the top of the page, and everything else is in order because that was the way that I added it. You can even rearrange the button if you want to. You can drag the image to be down a little bit, and I just pressed Command and an arrow on my keyboard, and suddenly that reappeared. So apparently that is Shift arrow to move forward. So apparently there's some kind of key command that actually hides this from the menu, and I don't actually know what that was because that was an accident. So just goes to show there's still quite a learning curve on Fluid Engine, and if you're not ready for it, it could definitely extend the time that it takes to build a website in this version of Squarespace because there's just more new things to learn. That said, you can really achieve some interesting layouts in Fluid Engine very easily as long as you don't need columns. The fastest way to do this on Fluid Engine is to grab this and duplicate and slide it over. Duplicate, slide it over, duplicate, slide it over. And you just have to do the math, basically, because on desktop you have 24 cells across, which means you can have an even number of columns as long as it divides evenly into 24. So that can either be 4 columns of 6, or you can do 3 columns separated by a lot. You can see this gets pretty tedious when you decide to change your mind, because one thing that you can't do is select over a group and resize it while they are all selected. You can move them around together, you can delete them, you can clone them from here, but you can't resize them together. That would make this process a lot faster if you could do that. So if we do 8 across, then we know, right, 8 times 3 is 24, so we just need to make all of the columns 8 across. And if you wanted these to be pushed apart from each other a little bit more than that, then you could actually go into your section settings and control what the gap is. By default, it's going to be 11 pixels between left and right and 11 pixels between top and bottom between all the cells. So if you increase the space between the cells, then you get more of a square cell instead of a rectangular one, and you have now 25 pixels in between. So you can push them further apart that way. And you could also decrease the space on top and bottom of the cells. You could give that a background. You could increase the height of the text block. And that way the button looks like, because it's overlapping the text block, it looks like it's inside the block. So you start to get that kind of collage layout that we're used to in Classic Editor, which you can't do in Fluid Engine. You have to make it yourself. So you could actually duplicate that, scoot it over, duplicate that, scoot it over, and you could have 3 different images, 3 different button links, 3 different titles like that. Just keep in mind, again, that when you build something like that, you have to check how it looks like on mobile. And this looks pretty rando, right? We have image title, maybe that should be up like that, and that should be down. So you can see how that just got kind of glitchy. Undo. Let's increase the text block size. So now we have these 3 elements together, but now we need the rest of it to scoot down. So let's select the rest of it and move it down a few. And if we reorder that one and change the height of that one, then we can grab these elements and move them back up. So yes, you can see how this can get pretty tedious. On the one hand, I genuinely appreciate the ability to do these things. On the other hand, a lot of people are going to not be familiar with the process or the need to make these adjustments on a granular screen-by-screen basis. And they're going to have a really up website on mobile because they did not remember to make these changes. One other thing that I've noticed when playing around with Fluid Engine sections is that you often get all this extra space at the bottom when you're creating and moving things around. Mostly this shows up in mobile view. When you start moving things around, the section just starts to grow, right? When you come into Squarespace and you're like, okay, that looks good. I'm going to move that up. I'm going to move that up. I'm going to make this go all the way across the page for mobile. Same thing for this one, all the way across the page. It's cropping her kind of funny, so you want to put the focal point on her face. Maybe we ought to check that for this one too. Now we need to drag the title up, paragraph up, and then sometimes you have all this extra space down here for no apparent reason. Just grab the little grabby bar, drag it back up, and get rid of it. End of story. It's one of those things that you just have to check as you build. If we switch back to desktop, you'll notice that the layout is still the same as it was. And if we switch back to mobile, it's the same as I just adjusted it. One thing that I think is really confusing for people, though, is because you can make mobile specific changes, they think that everything is mobile specific, and it's not. So if I give this text block a background color and I change the font to be bold, maybe put it in red, make it a different color, and then overlap this, you can create a really cool layout like that. But when I switch back to desktop, all of those changes that I made inside the element carry over to both layouts. So really what Fluid Engine is doing is allowing you to make position related changes on desktop view and on mobile view, but not individual changes to the content inside, because those changes show up in both places. So the changes that you make inside the text block, whether it's a background color, whether it's adding a space, whether you want to force it to wrap, maybe you want to create a neat little overlap layout like that. The changes that you made inside that text block, notice how I'm forcing Meet Tina to wrap because I clicked in between and did Shift Return or Shift Enter to force the paragraph to go down to the next line. Not a whole new paragraph, but just a new line. And notice that it did some weird spacing thing here. Go back to desktop, and because I made it wrap forcibly, it's doing that on desktop too. When you add a new button, we can do primary on that one, secondary on that one. When we look at mobile, and because I added that last, it'll be at the bottom. So let's bump it back up. If for some reason you wanted the buttons to look more like this, which is, I mean, not a great look, but you certainly could do it that way. If I changed the alignment to be left, I'll have to resize them just so you can see. If I make the alignment left and I change it from fit in the box to fill the box, which is the size that you're used to, if I go back to desktop, they will both be left aligned. And they also adopted the new design setting fit instead of fill. So just to reiterate, say this one more time with the people in the back. The things that you're changing on mobile are primarily just the position of the element on the page and how it crops. So resizing the element and positioning the element, not changing the contents within. There's still a lot of compromise is basically what I'm saying. This is not specific to Squarespace. This is an issue for any platform I've ever used to build a website, including Weebly, Showit, Shopify, Webflow, Squarespace, Wix. This is a responsive problem, not a platform problem. They all handle it in different ways, though. This is just how Fluid Engine is handling it. You just have to be aware of this and check both versions of your website. Also, as you're designing, check that breakpoint because that spacing starts to do funky things. If you can see it on the screen in this view, you can reduce the space and try to get rid of some of those issues before they actually become problems. So you just have to be very aware of what you're doing. There are more details to manage, but ultimately they end up being a good thing. You just have to manage more details, basically. Everything takes a little bit longer, and that's the downside. But ultimately, you do have a little bit more control as long as you're managing those details. So that's where I'm at with Fluid Engine. It's a love-hate relationship, and I use the word hate very lightly because I do actually enjoy using it now that I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it. As we are with all new things, there is just a learning curve that we have to figure out. Squarespace still has some glitches on their part. They are still working out. That's all very normal for new things, especially for software when you have literally millions of people using it. There's just so many variables. So while Squarespace works out all of those kinks, we are experiencing those glitches differently. Basically, it's just like, what are you most comfortable with? If you're not comfortable with Fluid Engine, that's okay. There are ways to work around it for the time being. I know that Squarespace has said they were going to keep our access to Classic Editor through the end of this year, 2022, but starting in 2023, all bets are off. We have no idea. We've not specifically been told if we'll still have access to Classic Editor. So if Fluid Engine feels uncomfortable, I don't recommend that you convert all of your Classic Editor sections to Fluid Engine because that's a whole other ball game. But going forward, when you create new pages, it's okay to start using Fluid Engine. Pages can have both Classic Editor sections and Fluid Engine sections. When you have both, sometimes it loads very slowly if the page is long and there's lots of sections on it. So my recommendation basically is to do what brings you joy. If you don't have time to learn a new editor, then it's okay for the time being for you to not do that. Just know that in the future, it could potentially become an issue after software updates don't affect your old version anymore, just like it did with 7.0. But it ultimately is not the end of the world, right? They are still giving us the ability to upgrade Classic Editor sections to Fluid Engine when we want to, which I personally am very thankful that they're giving us the ability to decide that for ourselves. And in the interim, if you want to pick it up and start learning it, create a page in your not linked section and give yourself a sandbox area to do things in that page where no one's going to see it, and ultimately just start getting comfortable with the platform. This is a platform-wide change. This is the direction that they are moving in, regardless of whether or not you like it. If you absolutely hate it, maybe it's time to think about a different platform altogether. I mean, this is the direction Squarespace is moving in, and I actually don't hate it. I really like it. Glitches aside, lack of tablet view aside, text wrapping issues aside, I know all of those things will get fixed in time, and I'm not worried. Squarespace is always introducing new features, and that being the case, I think that you've gotten my final word on the issue. Fluid Engine, do I like it? I think so. Am I using it on client sites? Yes, I am. Does it take longer to build those sites? Yes, it does. But ultimately, I think that negative is not so negative when you compare it with the new things that you're able to do with the Fluid Engine Builder. So while it's frustrating that things take a little bit longer and there's more things to check, the flip side of that is that I can do more with it without using code, and that's always a good thing. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so you get more content like this showing up in your feed, and I will see you in the next post. Hi, my name is Caitlin. I am the founder, designer of Launch the Damn Thing. I really need to stop doing that. Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm the founder and designer of Launch the Damn Thing. Why is that so bubbly? Hi, I'm Caitlin from Launch the Damn Thing. I design personally... Ugh. Damn it. Why is my stomach growling so loud? I'm Caitlin. If we haven't met... Ugh. Hi! Intros are hard. Hi, I'm Caitlin from Launch the Damn Thing. If we haven't met, I am the solo designer here at... I just said that. That's my target. Why did I say that?